Welcome to Case Files, the human factor. We are going to unpack and explore human behavior. And human behavior is fascinating. We're going to look at trauma, victimology, and I'm going to use all of my expertise over the last 25 years to really give you the gift of understanding human behavior and the fascination we've got with psychopathology, crime, victimology, criminal justice, mental health, forensics and statutory cases. And with that, I will, on my own and with the assistance of some of my guest speakers, really give you insight in what the human factor means in our lives and our daily existence. Welcome to the human factor. We're opening the show and we're going to do a podcast on human behavior. I'm Professor Tanya Robinson, and in today's episode, it's just an introduction of what we are going to look at going forwards in the episodes that will unfold over time. The human factor is about human behavior that we can all relate to. We've got people in our lives, we have gone through experiences, and life has shown us a lot of things through the journey of sort of just growing up, developing through life. And we need to look at understanding and untangling sort of what people bring to our lives. I have been a clinical sort of practitioner since 2001, and I sit with people every day and listen to their stories. And a lot of my clients and patients in some of the cases that I'm involved in has actually requested a podcast on human behavior and unpacking sort of what life brings to us. Not everyone has got the opportunity to, for example, go to a therapist or to understand the intricacies of what a case looks, for example, a forensic case. So this show will bring to you what happens in people's lives. It will talk about sort of stories of people's lives in, for example, a legal setting, a therapeutic setting. We're going to look at various sort of human pathologies and psychopathologies and just see what life is all about and what happens in people's lives, to show the traumas that they've gone through, living through the traumas, and just unpacking what they see and how they cope. I love the concept of being resilient, and I think through the journey of life, we all have to build a sense of grit and resilience. So that will often be sort of a theme in the podcast of, if you go through a certain set of circumstances in your life, how do you re-navigate that? And how do you get to the other end and feel that you can cope with life experiences, with certain traumas that has unfolded, or just sort of things that happens in life day to day. And as we live in a society, and, you know, if we think about the concept of sociology, people bring certain problems to our lives as well. And then we need to sort of look at how do we navigate other people and their own complex human behavior and how that transfers into our personal lives. So the human factor and the episodes that you will listen to would be focused on life experiences, unpacking therapeutically, and sometimes through a mental health and a forensic lens of how do we cope with life, how do we navigate challenges, and what is happening all around us. Often I find people live in their own bubbles, and I think it's important that people know and are educated about what happens in other people's lives. Because one thing that I do know is we learn and we grow through understanding other people's stories and what they've gone through. The first thing that I often ask people, and this is where human behavior and the human factor is quite relevant, is what makes us us? And that is often the first thing that I ask people in a case analogy. Historically, I did a lot of forensic analysis. And in those cases, the first question that you would ask people is, but who are you? And in a clinical setting, you also sort of ask in a first session is, but what are you all about? Who are you? What brought you here? And I think it is important for the podcast listeners to understand what brought me to a place where I decided that it would be good to have a podcast speaking about human behavior, untangling human behavior. So I think it's important for me to share with the listeners, where do I come from? What makes me me? And because I'm interested in other people's stories, and especially in a therapeutic and a clinical setting, I want to understand what people are about, and people need to understand, where do I come from? Often when people sort of sit with me and they don't know where I come from, because it's not needed or appropriate in that kind of space to share my story. It would be sometimes inappropriate to share sort of where do I come from. And especially in more of a legal, forensic, sort of criminal justice perspective, that is not something that you share within an interview. But it is important, I think, for this show and for going forwards with this podcast, that people understand, where do I draw from my knowledge? What is my experiences? And what is my resources and my education that enables me to talk to other people that is going to be on the show, or people that I'm going to interview, or even sort of when I just talk to the listeners on my own, is what is my source of reference? Where do I get my information from? Because it comes from somewhere. So for me, if I start of where do I come from, and I think of, if someone had to ask me, who am I? It definitely, the first sort of core memory, and we all have core memories, is I come from Africa. I live in Australia, and Australia has given other opportunities, but my heart is set in sort of where I was born in Africa. And I was privileged enough to come from a beautiful family, a mom and a dad that has really sort of given me sort of a life where I can think, a life where I can be a free thinker. That is really, not everyone has that. A life where I could be educated. If I think back to my life, and my mom's words that would resonate with me is, get an education. Education is power. And anyone that has been in Africa would understand that it's a privilege to have an education, because not everyone has got the ability or the resources or the opportunity to be able to go to school and to be able to get an education or to be able to read. If I look at sort of as an adult woman in Africa, sort of how difficult it was for some of the staff members or colleagues that I worked with that didn't have the opportunity growing up initially to be able to read. I grew up in apartheid. With apartheid, there was a lot of practices that was discriminative, that was unfair, that created a setting where people did not have the right to an education, that did not have the right to read. If we look as women, a lot of women in a patriarchal society, they did not have the opportunity to go to university, to be able to read. I've got 3 beautiful children, and I think when people ask me, who am I am a mom. And if you are a dedicated mother, you know what you have to teach children. And I teach my children that reading and having the accessibility to have books is a privilege, because still, if we look sort of worldwide, due to human behavior and human opinions, not everyone has got access and the resource to be able to read. And if we think about how do we learn, how do we educate ourselves, how do we obtain knowledge? Yes, we now have amazing sort of electronic features and technology of Google and YouTube, and there's a lot of knowledge that we can acquire. But the main and primary resource has always been reading, of opening a book, and I'm always surrounded by books, is to soak up knowledge by understanding what is going on around us. And I have found in practice and working with people, and I've seen thousands and thousands of people. So I've got the privilege and the insight of knowing that people, they are not educating themselves enough, and that makes them ignorant. And ignorance leads to a lot of human behavior that affects other people. For example, discrimination, racism, not having an understanding and empathy of what other people are going through. And that has got a ripple effect through sort of us as people, of how we treat others. It affects our levels of respect for other people, our humility. And if we have lost our humility, it is problematic for society. And a lot of my discussions in the human factor, I will always bring it back to, what is our value system? What is the principles that we live by? I speak to people about that often when they find themselves in dire straits in therapeutic sessions. Come closer to your values, come closer to your principles, that you can understand who you are as a person, because people lose themselves through what other people do, through other people's human behavior, through the traumas that we attach ourselves and that comes on our paths as unwanted gifts. And we need to be able to navigate through that, through developing insights in our lives. So for me, if I think back at my own life, I've always been a reader. Through school, you would find me sitting, perhaps being sort of a bit of a nerd, as what people would sort of label people, sitting and reading. I was the head of the library. I think that says it all. And through sort of just reading, it opened my world to other people's stories. It was not just my own story anymore. I could understand other people's story. And I think I always wanted to be in the helping profession. I often went with my family and my family at that stage was my brother, my mom, and my dad, and we would visit extended family. My paternal grandmother stayed in Zimbabwe, and she was a teacher at a school. And still today, I think what really sort of formed me, developed me into the therapist that I am, the clinician that I am today, is what I saw and what I soaked up of the work that she did, of helping children to read in the school environment. Just having a safe space for kids that came out of sort of areas that they were perhaps not as safe. And just creating that environment where people feel a sense of belonging. There's now recently been a lot of sort of studies of should Maslow's triangle, and Maslow's triangle talks about self-actualization. And one of the basic core needs of self-actualization is shelter and food. And a lot of researchers are now saying, should one of the steps of self-actualization not have been a sense of belonging? And I believe, and I see it with people that I work with, we all need a sense of belonging. I see it as an immigrant myself, of feeling displaced, that we do not have a sense of belonging, and that makes us feel sad, makes us feel anxious, because our roots feel if it has disappeared. And that is why it is so important that we create a space where we all have a feeling that we feel we belong, no matter where we come from. And I do think Australia gives that platform. There's a lot of it's culturally rich of other communities. People immigrate, they come to Australia for a new beginning. Refugees come here to find a place of safety. We do have to ask ourselves the question, does Australia provide that for their people? Because there's a lot of people that feel displaced here, and a lot of work needs to be done in the social justice system, in the mental health space, to really create a sense of safety for everyone here. So if I look at sort of my education that perhaps created me a sense of safety, is I walked a journey with sort of getting educated. I left school in 1997. I matriculated, so that would have been sort of the year 12 that we are now referring to. And I was lost, like I think most year 12s. I don't think every year 12 knows exactly what they want to do. I went to university away from home at a young age, left my parents, and I didn't have a clear vision. I started in studying in a beautiful part of Africa, Stellenbosch, that is like Adelaide, with wineries. And I did my first degree, and I can remember sort of not knowing what I was doing. I failed a few subjects. I was definitely not the erudite sort of student that sort of just scored like 90+%. That's what people think. That is not what happened. I had for my own home language, Afrikaans, that I still speak, 17%, because I thought I can speak it. Why should I study it? So it didn't start off too well. And I finished my degree, changing it a few times, but my core subject matters were psychology, social work, and sociology. And that gave me the richness of understanding people. And you walk out as a student not knowing much, but you know the basics of human behavior. But as what my life has unfolded, I also know that academics is one thing, but your own life journey provides you, and other people's life journeys provides you with the insight to understand and to stand tall in the helping profession to help other people navigate their own stories and lives. So that was sort of my starting point, and my first, I would say, the beginning of my career, because, and we've spoken earlier about that, is I don't believe I've ever had a job. I'm unemployable. I've never been employed. So I started sort of my career in sort of a small quarters that was a professor's staff quarters at that stage. It was in a reproductive health center, so that would have been sort of 2001. And then I started working in sexual health. But I was young, I knew nothing. I came from quite sort of a sheltered environment growing up. And all of a sudden I sat with patients with real life struggles. I worked with sex workers that had been violated and had their own journey where they were displaced. I worked in sort of a sex work facility where there were sex workers that I had to understand what are they going through. They were misplaced from Russia, trying to survive, providing for their families. That was my first experience of what people's lives looked like. And I traveled with my family a lot of Africa. I've seen poverty. I've seen how it is to have nothing, how you wake up the next day and you don't know where your food is going to come from. So I've seen challenges, but I think at that stage of my life, I really understood where people came from, how quickly life can change as well. I can see that now as an older version of myself navigating the 40s in my own midlife, how quickly it is that you've lost everything. And how do you get up again? A lot of factors, and I think that is why I called the show The Human Factor. Factors change in our lives. We can one day fly, the next day we are down on the ground and we don't know what is coming next. We need to know what is the power of resilience to get up, to navigate human factors in our lives. And from that point, working in that sort of clinic, sort of my career unfolded. I did a master's degree in human sexuality. I started interviewing women that have gone through violations and experiences. And I published my first book at that stage, When Sex Turns Sour. I started educating people on what matters, how to make life choices, how to navigate experiences in life, how young women should start empowering themselves. There's a lot of young women, and especially in that space of Africa, that do not have the tools or the resources to empower themselves when things happen to them, when they get violated, when they fall part of modern day slavery. They do not know. So that was my first sort of educational role, of educating young women of how to stand tall when they have been affected, how to walk through a case when you find yourself in a legal matter that you thought would never happen to you. How do you have a voice? And that was sort of my first experience of working with a young population group that did not have any voice. I then sort of developed sort of a clinical practice there, and I studied further and I did an education degree, and to know how to educate people, to now know how to take my knowledge and to share my knowledge. One of my role models in my life, or I would say just someone that I really look up to because I believe in the sense of democracy, is Nelson Mandela. I do believe growing up in apartheid and to have seen what that has done, growing through apartheid and looking at decolonization, I've seen what people can do to other people. I know what people can do that think they have a sense of privilege. And I understand that concept. And one of the things that I do believe our late president in Africa, Nelson Mandela, has taught people is that education and sharing our knowledge is power. Because we need to share. We cannot sit with what we know. And I think that is also the reason for the podcast. Because one of my patients once said, but some of your information sits between four walls. And we have to share what we know. We all know something. We all come from somewhere where we have a story that we can share. And if we don't share that, people don't know. They can't learn from us. And that is what my education degree taught me, is share what you know with others. And people laugh when they know what I sort of specialized in, but my major was English. My English is not that great, but I am an English teacher. My heart, and I still think in Afrikaans, even if I stay in an English-dominant sort of speaking country, I think in my native language and my native tongue, and that makes me me. And we get back to sort of who am I? That is me. That will always be me. Even if I've journeyed from a third world country, a developing country, to a first world country, I know who I am. I say to other people is know who you are. Do not become someone else. And people want us to become them because of their own stuff, because of their own insecurities, because of their own prejudices. But know who you are and that is who you bring first. Sometimes we are conditioned and we become developed. You have to be this person. You have to become this person. Parents want to make their children into someone that they don't want to be. Let's all give ourselves the opportunity to grow and to have the freedom to be who we want to be. And who am I? I am an educator. I am a helper. I'm a clinician. I'm a social worker. I'm a mother. I'm a friend. I'm a daughter. I'm a rebellious daughter sometimes. I'm sure my parents would say that. I give them grey hair. But we all bring something that is valuable to someone else's life. And someone else brings something valuable to our own lives. If we have an authentic sense of who we are, we can share our stories with other people. And that is what the human factor will be about, is sharing information with others that we can learn. People often ask me when I'm at a conference or when I talk, but why have I studied so much? I've been a registered student, I think, for 22 years of my life. And there's an ongoing joke, is that you not sort of get it at your first PhD? Perhaps I didn't, because subsequently after my first PhD, I did sort of 3 other PhDs. And at my 4th PhD, I still sort of went and I sort of specialized and got certified in other sort of fields and subject matters. But I love knowledge and I love learning. And I think throughout our life, we have to learn. The person that is the most ignorant is if they think they should not learn from others. The person that sits in front of me that says, but I know everything. You don't know everything. We can never know everything. That is impossible. So we have to learn, and not just through academic stature, but through life. That is the learning platform, is let's learn through our life experiences. I do not stand away from my own life traumas. I have been traumatized. I don't sit with my clients looking at them. I'm not a judge. I've been taught that my whole life to be non-judgmental. Perhaps that is my downfall in life as well, is to be so non-judgmental, to be a deep empath. But it makes us open to learn from other people. So through sort of my academic journey, I initially, with my initial PhD, had quite a clinical subject matter. I focused on the couple in an unconsummated marriage. And what a learning experience of sitting with couples and understanding what they've gone through and their own sort of emotional struggles, how their past got transferred into their present, of how they struggled because of their childhood history, of things that has happened and how they bring that into sort of an unconsummation of marriage. So that really I learned a lot through that sort of journey. It's not just a publication. I didn't do it for the research points. Every researcher knows, there's a criteria of what you want to score as a researcher. It's to understand human behavior. That is why I study. So when people ask me, why do I keep on registering? Why do I keep on studying? Because I'm passionate about understanding people. And as I sit here, I still don't understand people. There's people that has harmed me in my life. There's people that has surprised me in my life. I've had recent surprises in my life that I'm like looking at myself and I think, how did this happen to me? Because human behavior are complex. It is fascinating. And we get blindsided by our own biases, by our own limitations. And people seek people out as well. So even with all my knowledge and understanding of people, I still get surprised. It is not easy to understand what people are about. But that is why this can be such an interesting show for people to watch, because we can come to them to give a little bit of insights of other people's stories, and from different diverse backgrounds, from different cultural groups, from different sort of life journeys, from a judge to a patient, that can give us insights on what life is all about. What human behavior have they came across that sparked an interest that they can share with us? So we will talk on the show about modern day slavery, personality disorders, criminal cases that I've seen that have unfolded, some of the trial sciences that I had to do, some patients and sort of information that they have shared that may be fascinating on a case study level that can help someone else to grow in their lives. The topic of psychology, topics of social work, of forensic science are interesting. And I am passionate about social and forensic justice. And I have had to ask myself in my own life, and in a lot of patients' lives that sits in front of me, is there something like justice? We talk about it. It's all over the media. Fight for justice. What is justice? Call this helpline, you will get justice. What is justice really? Is that when you get some orders in a court? Is it when an offender or a perpetrator is sentenced? What do you do in your personal life when you feel there's been injustice? What does justice really look like? I think my downfall is that I believe in justice, but my life journey has shown that sometimes there is no justice. And you have to get to a place by some of the human factors that have affected your own life of how do you get to a place of joy? How do you get to a place of peace again? Freedom. We all have been affected by something in our lives, if we're honest about it, that have stolen our sense of freedom. How do we get that back? Because freedom and not feeling safe sort of ties into each other. There's an intricacy, there's sort of a connection, there's a golden thread of how do we sit to feel safe? People want to feel safe. People run out of war zones. People run out of marriages. People run out of relationships to feel safe. And when people and circumstances in the environment steals our safety, it's only then when you know how it feels to feel vulnerable when safety has been taken away from you. I can remember a day where I got a phone call. My son and my brother sort of went to Cape Town and they nearly got hijacked. And their sense of safety got stolen. They were nearly murdered. And if I have to play out that life script in my mind, how would my life have looked if they were taken from me? That my sense of safety would have been violated through a human factor, through someone that feels, and I understand that as well, that a cell phone or a few dollars in dollar terms is more important than someone's life because they have to give something for their family that hasn't eaten for a week or two. It happens. Life unfolds. There's a ripple effect. And we all affect each other's safety through, for example, life experiences like that. I can recall sort of standing in a shopping center with a gun against me, experiencing that trauma that I know that my children would be orphaned, that would grow up without a mother, by just making or saying the wrong thing. My safety was violated. But if you look at the other person and their life script, we talk about life scripts, why does someone do that? Why does someone steal someone else's safety? Because of certain reasons. Injustices. Life is unfair. People come and sit with me and say, why is this so unfair? There's no answers. Life is unfair. But we have to navigate that. We have to be greater than that. It is not easy. Life is not easy. It is a journey that is not going to, we are not placed here to just have fun and that it's easy. No one has made that promise to us. That is why one of the biggest skills that I can share with my people, with my own family, is grit and resilience. You get up every day, no matter what comes on in your day. There were days people look at my life and they think, I've got it all together. No, I don't always have it all together. There's days that I always say to people, I get up for my tea. Yes, sometimes I have to get up to make a cup of tea, to recalibrate, to think, how am I going to get through this day today? Because my life script, there's been markers of trauma there as well. I also sometimes get triggered. So we need to know ourselves very well. We need, as people, to understand human behavior. It is a gift that I can gift people, that human behavior and the understanding of human behavior is critical to survive life, to thrive life. That is important. There's a saying of giving, we have all been given unwanted gifts. And I say to my patients in a therapeutic clinical setting, give me your unwanted gifts. I sit with that. We all want to give our unwanted gifts away. May that be that we have been violated. May that be that we have been harmed. We have lost someone. We have lost some of our life. We have been displaced. There's been injustice. All of that we can do by sharing stories, because in sharing stories, we give the unwanted gifts to other people. It's important that we have voice. How many people don't have a voice? I was flabbergasted. I'm often flabbergasted. I think that's my favorite word. Last year, Women's Day, I had a conversation with colleagues, and one of the colleagues that is a seasoned man shared with me, absolutely convincingly, with ignorance, that why is there a Women's Day? And I looked and I considered, is my voice being taken away by this conversation? Can a person still ask that question today, still in today's society? Why is there a Women's Day? There is women that are being murdered, raped, offended, women that cannot be educated still, yes, in today's society, that are not allowed to go to school. Do people not watch the news? And these are people that are critical role players in society, that think that that is a voice that should be shared. And everyone has got a voice. So I appreciate opinions, but we should think. I always say, thank you for thinking. And I wanted to say in that context, please think. Think before we say, because it has an impact on other people, what we say. My mother used to always say and perhaps my dad, don't say anything if you don't have anything good to say. And it is a valuable lesson. But sometimes we also have to say something that perhaps is realistic, that is truthful. And in that situation, I had to share my thoughts. I was still not fully sharing my thoughts. But we need to know how to navigate other human behavior, that we do not get silenced. And one thing that I've learned, I've published a book, The Silenced Child. People do get silenced. We educated people get silenced. Vulnerable people get silenced. I, in my own life, with my strong voice, have been silenced. Through the injustices of the system, it is not always fair. How does that sit with us? What do we do with that? And that is what I want us to think about in this podcast, is what do we do with the complexities of human behavior? My last PhD was in criminal justice, and it was a writing piece on how do you become an expert witness when children have been violated. If we look at the statistics of children that get violated, girl children, boy children, the violation, the child murders, the family murders that take place in society, some of those cases, and the relevance of talking about that, where people make comments that they will take other people's lives. And once again, there's systemic errors. We know that it has happened. We've just seen how many sort of family murders there's been, how many females have been murdered recently. There's males that get, and I'm not minimizing that, males that get murdered. If we look at the crimes in sort of between males, it is relevant to speak openly about this topic that people can understand. And sometimes we have to have a bit of an academic perspective, but we can also just talk basic language that is accessible to everyone, practical solutions that everyone needs to understand. Not everyone wants an academic spin. Not everyone wants textbook knowledge. One of the cases that will always stay with me, and it was in sort of one of my books that I've published, The Silenced Child, was a young girl, and I had to manage that case in my master's degree, where she was locked up in a dog kennel, and she was treated as a dog for more than 7 years. Her parents kept her there. And when she was found, she couldn't talk, she couldn't walk, she had no sense of what it is to be a human, because she was treated as an animal. Not that any animal should be treated, and the animal abuse that takes place there, but she was treated and being abused through sort of animal abusive sort of behavior through her parents. And she had to learn how to talk again. She had to learn how to feel safe again. And I can remember that day as if it was yesterday, how to sit with a child that her whole formative years was stolen by people that she was supposed to trust. People often ask me sort of, how do we trust each other? And I don't know how to answer that often, because not all people can be trustworthy. People lie, people abuse, people misrepresent. That is part of human behavior that we will be discussing in this show. I look at sort of my journey in criminal justice as well. One of the first placements that I had was in a security facility with sex offenders, with people that have taken other people's lives, and I had to do group work. And a systems error one day left me and the other students there without any sort of security measures in the facility. And I thought in that day, is this going to be my last day? I felt so panicked, because I wanted to trust that I'm going to be okay, but I also knew that I was sitting with individuals that were desperate enough to take someone else's lives, their freedom, their sense of safety. And I looked in the work that I did there, and it was groundbreaking work to sit with these individuals and understand their stories, understand their hurts, understand their life scripts. And the other day I read through some of the letters that they wrote as part of their rehabilitation. And I was humbled again of the experiences that people go through, of how complicated life can be. And we have to try and understand. Victims need to understand offenders. Offenders' families need to understand sort of what everything is about, what life is about, why this happened, that we don't pass this intergenerationally to other people. Intergenerational trauma and intergenerational patterns are a thing. It passes through us through generations, and we sit with that. People are not talking enough about that because we shy away from talking openly about our own life scripts, our parents' life scripts, their parents' life scripts. It's important that we talk to each other. And historically, people were silenced to talk freely about mental health, about sort of what has happened in other people's lives. This is the time to freely speak, that we can learn from each other, to safeguard ourselves, to safeguard others, to have the skills to navigate complex human behavior. We have a lot of stories that we can tell, and I have a lot of stories that I can share with people. I think we have all had people in our lives that have harmed us. We've all had people in our lives that help us shine. It is time that we share that. It is time that we look at it with detail, and we listen, we learn to listen. Often we don't listen, and we need to look at how do we are open enough to share, that we can understand what good human behavior look like, what sort of psychopathic and sort of those triangles, sort of dark triangles, the Machiavellianism, the narcissism, the psychopathy of life looks like, and how does all of that make sense, that we understand the human factor. It is empowering, and it will be able, if you listen to the podcast, we can share and we can understand and we can feel empowered that there's a space to understand human behavior. So I invite you to listen to our podcast, and for everyone to share sort of just with me their stories, and for me to share my knowledge as a professor, as a doctorate in the subject field, as a human, as a person, as a friend, as a therapist, and as a forensic person and a victimologist, is let's share, and I will share, that there is a full understanding of the complexities in the world that we live in.